picture, so it at least looks like I'm kind of looking at the camera. How you guys doing this morning?
Good.
Nice.
Oh yeah. Feeling
Good.
good, feeling adaptable.
Feeling very
Adaptable,
adaptable.
yeah, very much. So I am kind of sleepy, even though I got like tons of sleep last night. I feel almost overslept. Is that a thing?
Uh,
Yeah, think so.
Yeah.
Should be.
I've
I
heard of
think it
that
all
before.
depends upon which part of the sleep cycle you wake up in. Because,
Oh yeah.
if I wake up on my own, most of the time it's okay, but with an alarm clock, it
Yeah.
just
Oh,
I
I
did
hate
the
alarm
whole
clocks.
alarm, turned off the alarm, second
Ugh.
alarm, turned off the alarm,
See, I
third
think it makes it
alarm,
worse though a
woke
lot of
up.
times because you
I
just
know.
like it's
And then you're like
horrible.
in your head waiting for the next alarm to go off, like knowing it's coming. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Good morning, Matthew.
hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So, before we actually get into today's episode, I want to make a quick announcement. If you guys
Oh,
haven't seen, we have recently launched our first mini course called the Web Dev Kickstarter. And this is a great one for anybody who's just brand new to coding. Like you really don't know anything at all, want to start getting into the realm of web development and just need like a good, you know, kicking off point, I guess. It's a really cool
If you
program.
wanted to kickstart your web development
yeah,
Yes.
career,
there you go.
Yes.
Oh, dude, it's
Exactly.
awesome too. It's
It's
a
a
solid
really
collection
cool
of pretty much everything you need to
course.
know, I think, too, about that stuff.
Yeah. So inside, there's a bunch of videos of Danny actually walking you through the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then a bunch of code alongs with me where I'm going to like, show you how to actually do those basics. And then at the very end, there is a project that we build, which is really cool. It's a Chrome extension where you build a Pokemon card and you hook into the Poke API um,
Okay,
to
yeah.
pull some data about which Pokemon, and it's really cool. So there is a link sort of at the top of the group under the featured section to show you a little bit about that. If you click into that, you can also just head over to our website, codenoobs.io/courses, and we're going to start building out a course library there. And that would be the first one. So just wanted to announce that, make sure that you guys know that's in there. Um, and we've already had a couple people who have started it and are like, dude, this course is amazing. So if you're curious, if you like need somewhere to sort of get started, don't know where to start, that's your spot. And if you just
did
want
you
to
mention
really
the
start,
October discount?
oh, I didn't. I didn't. You want to mention it? Go ahead. I totally forgot.
Okay, so during the month of October, there is a discount. We're
Yeah.
calling it the October discount.
Yeah.
And where it says enter discount code, if you write October, you'll get the October discount, which is how
Yeah.
much off?
Half off.
50% off. Yeah. Just as a
Yeah,
little thank
discount.
you to you guys, for hanging out with us. So before Halloween, you can use that code to get 50% off
I think it's
the
awesome too that it's a
program.
Chrome extension too, because they're fun
Yeah,
and
it's
they're
it's very
actually like
cool.
it shows you how easy they are to make too, I think, overall. Like
Yeah.
they're pretty
And you
awesome.
don't need to know anything special, right? Like you can
Yeah.
be brand new to coding and build a Chrome extension, which is really just a little website that lives in your browser. So pretty cool. I know, very creative
Yeah.
name, Bryce.
Good
Yes.
morning,
I
Bryce.
thought
Good
of it
morning,
all on my
Chris.
own. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. And yeah, discount code October.
Who
Once
would guess
October's
that though?
over, though, you can't use that code anymore, just so
Yeah.
you. So
hmm
We'll have
I
to
did
change it
it
to
so that you
November.
remember which month of the year you can use that code in.
hmm
So anyway, with that, today's episode was supposed to be about a math teacher turning into a developer, but I think Randall, his alarm probably went, I don't know, died or something or whatever.
hmm
So we're actually going to change the topic today um, to be why is it important to be flexible as a developer? Because this is like a great case study. We all wake up late, we all have things that come up in our life, and we have to be flexible, right? Around not only just life, but in terms of like development, right? I've worked with a lot of different companies where things change very quickly at the drop of a dime. All of a sudden, like, the company pivots or the project pivots or there's some new feature we have to build all of a sudden or whatever it is. And you as a developer have to learn how to be flexible.
I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, importantly too, those things change are out of your control. It's
Yeah,
not stuff
very
that
much
you
so.
can like, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's like a lot of the stuff is stuff you just have no ability to actually like change. So you have to be able to adapt to it.
Well,
Yeah,
should we start off by talking about the dichotomy of control?
We could.
sure. Because I don't know
Yeah.
what that means. So yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so like 2000 some years ago, was it Epictetus who
Epictetus, yeah.
Epictetus who said there are things that are in your control and there are things that are out of your control.
Hmm.
Now, basically your judgments, your actions, your decisions, pretty much that's in your control.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything else is out of your control.
So
But like,
where would hurricanes fall in this? Because I
yeah,
just had to deal with a
decision,
Well, like
hurricane
your
judgment,
last
action.
week.
preparation,
Okay,
that's in your
that's
control, right? Like how
Yeah.
you plan, how you prepare, in your control. How you respond to it, right? That's in your control. The storm
Yeah.
itself, totally out of your control, right? Where it hits, how hard it hits. I mean, that's nothing, right?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, we
Good
had a
morning, Eric.
yeah, good morning, Eric. We had a pretty interesting week. I don't know. I live in South Florida. Luckily I'm not exactly where the hurricane hit, but it did definitely go through this area. And I've been here for a number of years and I have been through a couple hurricanes and understand that they're worthwhile preparing for. Like, you got to do some basic preparations.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's ever experienced a hurricane in here, but they're quite, I know Bryce has probably, and yeah, Randall has. It's quite an interesting thing. Like, you know, some of the takeaways that I had when the first hurricane that I ever went through, I never realized that like gas stations could run out of gasoline.
I
Yeah.
was just gonna say that. It was an
Like,
epiphany. Like it was a crazy thing when you're like, what do you mean there's no more gas?
yeah, they're
Like,
like, no, 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 but like
Yeah.
every gas station, like no more
yeah.
gas at all.
Well, it's funny. They only
Um,
hold like 36,000 gallons or something, I think. It's not that
yeah,
much, or 18 or
it's
something. Yeah.
not. And so, going through a couple of them, I've learned to prepare for them. Like when we heard about the hurricane was coming Monday morning, I was like, fill up the car, fill up the motorcycle, fill up the gas
Start
tank.
filling up the bathtub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't want to sit in those
Fill
lines
up
later.
plastic bags.
Just trash
Um,
bags.
but what's funny is like the next day I'm driving by the gas stations and lo and behold, like they're just out of gas and people are trying to line up and getting angry that there's no gas. And it's like, yeah, well, that's, something that was within your control. And unfortunately, people choose not to really care about it. And I
But it's a
noticed,
good example of it too, because then they get mad at the world, right?
right.
For
Yeah.
for stuff that, really there's nothing to be mad about. It just is what it is,
Yeah.
essentially.
It's just, it is what it is.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So
And
a
that
lot
brings
of
us to
this
our
week,
topic of flexibility. So
right.
what can you do in those situations to be flexible and how can you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, my experience was this week, you know, I didn't really have a ton of time to get anything else done because a lot of that was spent getting gas, grocery shopping, making sure like kids are cool and like understand what's about to happen, making like taking in all of the stuff. I like gardening, so we have like a crap load of plants outside, which is it's awesome until there's a hurricane and you have to take in like a million plants, locking things up, like just a bunch of like house chores essentially, right? Um, so yeah, and then I
So
actually
how does
stayed,
this so how does flexibility relate to being a developer? You have stuff
well,
that happens, got to
yeah.
be
So
flexible.
so I think you guys made a good point, right? Is as a developer, you have to understand like what's within your control and what's not, right? So there's certain things as a developer that we have control over. We have control over our code, we have control over how we spend our time, what we focus our energy on. But if we're working for a company, we don't have control over what they're choosing to do with the project or what direction they're
Yeah.
taking that
How
project.
about dependencies we're using in our projects?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. That's a good one. Like we don't have control. I mean, I feel like that's a borderline one, right? Because
Well, explain dependencies first, because I think some people may
yeah.
not understand what they are.
So a dependency is basically somebody else's code that you're using in your project, right? So it might be a package, like essentially think of it like a folder that contains some piece of code that does something um, useful in your project, and you use it because you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel and like rewrite code that's already out there and works. In some cases, it's amazing because like for example, inside a web dev incubator, we're building this restaurant project. And part of that project is to have like a spinny wheel. So when somebody clicks a button, the wheel spins and chooses a random restaurant for them, right? Um, awesome, really cool thing. Do I want to code that all out? Probably not. It's a lot of code to make a wheel that spins and chooses a random restaurant and all these things. So instead of doing that, we opted to use a package called, I think it's called like React Custom Roulette, right? So it's like a roulette wheel. We can style the wheel, make it look how we want, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel, literally, right? And so I think that's like a borderline thing, right? We have this option to use a dependency, somebody else's code. However, we're not in control of that code. So if they update that code, change something, it breaks. And that actually happened in our project and I don't think it was actually the developer's fault either. I think there was an update in Chrome browsers that stopped the functionality of the spinning wheel. So it stopped spinning for a little bit. Now, at that point, we had two options. We could either build the dependency out on our own or wait for an update. And in this case, we were still building out the project. So we just waited and the developer fixed that. So
that's a good example too, I think, because that's one of the other sides of it, right? Is like when we're starting stuff, it's also on us to like make recommendations that are smart and to think about these things. Not that you always have control over it, but keeping it in mind because it does make it hard, and it also affects later on iterations of the project. Updating and stuff can be difficult. If you have too many dependencies, it can be hard sometimes or impossible to actually change to a new sort of like iteration of, say, like your main framework or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's an important consideration that developers have to make when they're designing a project is there's a balance between how much time I have to actually develop something versus this trade-off of like, can I use somebody else's code with the potential for something to happen? And then that means there's more maintenance that has to be done. I mean, there's I don't know the exact story, but I know there's a pretty common not a common. There's a story of a package that was used in, I forget, like it was a very basic package, like dependency that's been used in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other packages, right? It's like a dependency of a dependency. And the developer pulled their package off of the Node package store, basically. I don't know if it's like
manager
or Node package manager.
Whatever.
They pulled their package and it broke like half the internet.
Yeah,
right? Because so many people depended on this. It was a very small package too. Like it did, I don't remember exactly what it did, but like
I know what you're talking about. I don't remember what
like
it did there either.
Yeah.
It was some weird little thing that it did though, and took care of, and that's what happens, right? I mean, they get added in. I mean, a lot of them too get added in without, like, you use Next or React or something. You automatically have a lot of dependencies because
I do remember like a little bit about like why it happened, which is kind of crazy. So it was called like Kik or something like that, or it had something to do with a package called Kik, right? And the developer had this package, they named it that, and then there was a giant corporation called Kik that's like a messaging app, I think, that paid to get that name from Node package manager. They like literally paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars to steal that name from a developer. And the developer basically said, well, screw you, I'm taking all of my packages down. And that's why it broke, right? So pretty interesting story, right? Because the developer was like, fine. And then what happened, I think, is he got everything back because it broke literally half the internet.
He's like, I'll show you guys. Watch this.
Good.
Yeah. Everything depends on this. I think another situation too is like, what do you guys do when like, or how do you deal with changes when like they come up abruptly with a project or with like work or something? Because I think those are hard for everybody. When things happen that you can't control, but it also has a big impact on your own life, right? And your day.
Yeah. I start with rage and frustration
and smash things.
Yeah.
And then destroy my computer and have to go buy another one.
Yeah, exactly.
And eventually after I cool down.
No, I mean, I think where you sort of started with this dichotomy is the best place to start is like, what is in my control and what's not in my control, right? Because
and also thinking about what's important to you. Because like the looking at the things that are in your control, your decisions, your judgments, your actions, those are looking primarily at what you value. So your values, what's important to you. And so like sometimes it may be not handling someone else's emergency because it's not important to you, even though it may mean dealing with difficulty, maybe losing a job, who knows what it could be. But yeah, you have to evaluate that stuff.
No, I think that comes up a lot too. It came up in our decision to transition careers, right? I mean, to take on development in the first place, that comes up a lot, right? Like, what's in my control and what do I actually value? Do I want to keep doing what I'm doing? This path is maybe wrong for me. Yeah, I think that's a good point because sometimes it's not worth even going forward with something if it's really contrary to what you value.
Yeah. I know, like, with personal experience as a developer, one of the first jobs that I had out of a boot camp was working for a startup. And one of the things that you'll immediately notice when working with a startup is that things change all the time, right? And people make promises that don't always come through. So that was something that I dealt with quite a bit with that project. Was the development timeline kept getting pushed, the funding timeline kept getting pushed, all these things kept getting pushed and changed all the time. So a lot of what I learned from that and a lot of the takeaways were how to be adaptable and how to like roll with the punches, kind of, right? Like every time that I would have a meeting, it's like, whoa, okay, everything's changed again. And so I think part of our job as a developer is also like what you said, right? Is understanding what is important to us and at what point do we, decide to make our own decision instead of just rolling with all these punches, right? Because that's something I had to do where I put a lot of time and energy and still have equity in this company, right? But I made a decision at some point of like, okay, the direction that I thought this was going is not the direction that it's going now. The timeline that we had discussed when I was onboarded is not the same as what it is now. And so I made a decision to step away from that company because I felt like my time would serve me better doing other things like building Code Noobs and building other projects that I wanted to do and focus on my priorities, which, I had a huge priority in this startup until other people's priorities were not on the same page as mine. And I had to change and like be flexible of, I'm still contributed a lot to that project and I'm thankful for being part of that and getting the experience I did. But also I realized like, this is just working for somebody else again. And it's, I don't have that freedom like I thought I did and that autonomy, which is really what I wanted as a developer, right? That's why I went to a boot camp. That's why I went through all this process of learning all this stuff because I wanted to be able to do things on my own, right?
Well, that's a good example too, because I think whenever you work for other people, so much is going to be out of your control because it's going to be a team or an organization. There's hierarchies, right? So a lot of it you just don't have, you can recommend things, but that's about as far as it goes. And at some point, sometimes walking away is the right thing when there's, when it's totally outside of your priorities like that. And I think that's why a lot of us got into this was for that freedom to make our own decisions more rather than being kind of always having to kind of just do what other people want us to do.
Well, I'm glad you guys brought this up because one of the areas that I was thinking of in terms of adaptability and flexibility is the human element. So as tech people in general, we're not good with other people. Like we spend so much time in front of computers because generally human relationships don't come easy to us. And so learning how to deal with people and how to deal with conflict with other people. And like, one of the things that's helped me out is trying to see stuff from someone else's viewpoint. Because the crazy thing is there's no one answer that's correct and there's no ultimate truth, even though clearly I'm going to think it's what I believe is the right thing. But the other person, the other person believes their point of view just as much as I do. And so trying to see it from the other person's point of view and finding how they're right can oftentimes help you deal with those conflicts and deal with some flexibility in that area.
That can make you a lot more flexible. Yeah. If you can empathize sort of and see their situation at least a little bit and understand it, that can make it a lot easier to deal with the changes.
I think about that actually a lot right now because we're in a like political cycle right now in the US. If you guys are, I think everybody in here
Haven't
is
heard.
US. Yeah. Right. There's an
Unite.
upcoming
What?
election. And one of the most interesting things to me is how in every single thing that happens in the world, there are these two seemingly completely diverse perspectives on the same exact event, right? Where like one group sees things one way and the other sees things the other way. And they're both trying to prove to each other that they're right and they know the ultimate truth. And the reality is, if we look at it, ultimately, there is no such thing as like real truth, right? It's sort of like there's a perspective, there's an angle on everything, there's a way to like sort of view everything that makes sense with my narrative, but there is no ultimate truth. There's no right or wrong answer to anything in life, right?
Also, it makes it so hard too, you know, I think to
yeah.
deal with stuff sometimes because there isn't necessarily a clear path always.
And also politicians play into that. Like they definitely want to spread false information because they know that the narrative of whatever it is splits the nation and causes people to, you know, be on one side or the other. Whereas like
and pay attention.
Yeah, and we would all get along a lot better, I think, if we were all just understood like there is no ultimate truth. There's just an interpretation of events, right?
And here's another thing that may blow your mind. So when I was doing the master's in cybersecurity, I took a course on cyber warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And not only do politicians want to divide the country, but it's actually the written goal of some other large nation states to polarize America in terms of race issues, in terms of political issues, in terms of gender issues, to help divide the country and make it weaker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So we just have to be more flexible and understanding.
A little bit, yeah, because it's important. That's crazy, isn't it? When you think about it.
I had another point, and now I forgot what it was. It was something.
Oh, it'll come back. We'll talk about something else.
So
why is it important for a developer to be physically flexible?
Like to be able to do splits?
Well, I think this is important because I say it kind of in jest, but also it is important because we spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer. And if you don't take time to actually focus on your body, so some type of exercise, getting fresh air, stretching, maybe you're not gonna last very long as a developer. Anthony can do a cartwheel. Way to go, man!
That's awesome. I can't.
No, I think that's actually a really good point. It's something that I like to focus on a lot and talk about inside the Web Dev Incubator, and have actually focused some videos on a bit too. Is that as a developer, we do sit in front of a computer for very many, like multiple hours at a time, and that's horrible on your body. But it's also really bad on your mind, right? Like I think everybody knows that social media is generally bad for you to like doom scroll for hours and hours and hours, right? And some of that is just because you're just flushing your brain with dopamine to the point where dopamine doesn't work anymore. But also it's just because you're staring at a glass screen that just smashing your eyes with like bright light and stuff.
Yeah.
And we need to realize that humans were not designed for this, right? Like humans evolved to be out in nature, and there's calming effects with going out in nature, exercising our body, right? So I do think that's very important.
Yeah, like Bryce says he can do a somersault, maybe.
He thinks. Possibly.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny.
Chris can rollerblade. Yeah.
It's good to see.
Nice.
Yeah,
it's the question I have is, how often are you guys doing this? Like, how often are you somersaulting?
All the time.
Well, I've heard a somersault a day keeps the doctor away. That's the saying, isn't it?
I think so.
Oh God.
Did that thing? Did the thing you forgot come back?
I was gonna actually say something. I think it is good too, though, because with the physical part of it too, I think there's one of the things I always struggle with too, is just being flexible too about managing your time correctly too. I think it involves some flexibility as well, because it's easy to get caught up in stuff too, especially when you're sitting doing like coding. You can sit there all day and do it.
Yeah.
Well, I found personally that breaking up my day into multiple coding sessions of like 2 or 3 hours works really well for me, because at that 2 or 3 hour mark, I start to get frustrated. I can get bogged down. Every once in a while, I'm really into it and I can power through. But like having the idea that I'm going to do 2 or 3 hours of coding and then go to the gym and then do another 2 or 3 hours and then go take a walk. That really helps energize me so that the 2 to 3 hours is really focused work as opposed to just sitting in
And you
front
don't
of
drag it on, because I think that's, like that happened to me the other day where I was in like a good space for a while coding, but then I just went too long. And by the end, like, you get so tired, you can't like solve problems anymore. Like your brain doesn't work. And I was getting frustrated. I was like, oh, I'm just exhausted and I need to stop doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, I get really moody when I do that, when I get
Oh,
tired.
dude, so do I.
And
It's
so
horrible.
I notice it because I'm just like, I'll never figure this out. I'm never going to be a
I'm a
developer.
failure.
It was all a waste. And then I'm just like, oh wait, I'm tired. Let me take a
Yeah.
nap.
Yeah.
And then you feel better.
because
It's crazy.
I think my brain sort of naturally does that, where I get to a point in the middle of the day where I'm just shot and I'm like, okay, time to work out. And that's what I do and I have like a little home gym in my garage, which sort of is nice because while it's extremely hot, I still do get some sun and fresh air while I'm working out.
It's also super convenient.
Nice.
You don't have to.
Yeah, it's super convenient as well. I mean,
yeah.
I like the idea of going to a gym, but I've always found in my life that having that extra barrier of like having to drive somewhere to get to a gym makes it that much less likely that I'm actually going to do it.
I read a great study where they actually surveyed, it was like 10,000 people, and if a gym was more than 5 minutes away, your likelihood of going decreased by like 85%.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too. I mean,
it does make sense though, because it's time you're adding to that whole exercise, right? Like it could take 30 minutes, but now if you got to drive 20, now it's an hour and a half,
and most of the time exercising is hard. It's not it's fun afterwards, but beforehand it's hard. You have to put in some work. And if on top of that, then you have to drive out of your way, you're like, yeah, forget it, not today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did sort of remember what I was going to say. So I had I don't know what it was exactly it was related to, but I did have an action call this week, and I thought it was I guess this does sort of tie into flexibility when you're starting, but almost on the opposite of like not being overly flexible. Okay, so I had this call with a really nice gentleman, and we were talking about his history and his journey as a developer. And he was explaining to me that he's actually worked in a lot of tech adjacent jobs, right? And what was funny was, the beginning of the call, I sort of talked to him about what's his developer journey. And he's like, it's really weird for me to hear somebody refer to me as a developer. And then he went on to explain that he's worked as like a QA tester. He's done all these like tech adjacent things. He's done basically everything a developer does without actually just writing the code, right? So he works for a software company. And I was like, one of the things that we talk about inside the Web Dev Incubator is mindset and how it's important to start referring to yourself as a developer as soon as possible. And there's a really important reason why is that if you don't consider yourself a developer, nobody else will. And there's no sort of like finish line of like, enough to become a developer, right? To call yourself that. There's no like, oh, you understand this language or that language. I mean, he had learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Java, C#, SQL. He knows all these different languages. And I was like, you're a developer. Like you may not realize this, but, and so the reason I'm saying this about flexibility is, I asked him also, what are your goals? Like, what do you actually want to do? And so he was like, well, so far I basically anything that somebody's willing to give me, I'm take that on. Like I started learning Java because that's what the company I work for now codes in. And I was like, yeah, but what are your goals? Like not the company's goals. What are your goals? And he's like, well, I really like to move to Europe and, be my own boss and like build websites for other people. And I was like, awesome. And so the point of that is when you're starting out, it's very easy to just take on whatever anybody's willing to give you. And I've done this myself where
you don't know necessarily what you want either early on sometimes too. So it makes sense. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. But actually having, a set goal for yourself and not being extremely flexible sometimes is really good for you because we talk about this in sales a lot, right? Is that if you're trying to sell something and you're trying to appeal to everybody, you actually appeal to nobody, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes in development. If you're trying to appeal to every single company out there, every hiring manager out there, you're going to appeal to none of them, right? It's sort of like when you go to a boot camp and you learn 50 different languages and technologies and you put all 50 of those on your resume, you're appealing to nobody because they all know that that's bullshit. Like you don't know 50 languages after 6 months of learning, right? Where you haven't built a single project on your own. So I think it's really important as a developer to have flexibility in the projects that you're doing, but in your goals have very little flexibility. Like if you say I am a JavaScript developer or I am a C# developer, that actually is more appealing to a hiring manager because they're like, that person specializes in that. But if you're like, I do HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, no SQL, like all these different things, then a hiring manager is going to be like, well, they know a lot of stuff, but they're probably not the best fit for this role because we need somebody who specializes in this.
I think that's also good just in long-term planning too, and in getting clear about what you want in general. Because everybody's trying to learn this to try and do something. You don't want to like end up in a job you hate anyway while still doing development, right? Because that can happen too.
and you know, to go back to this gentleman that I was talking to, it's like his goal was to like move to Europe and work remote and whatever. And it's like if he just keeps taking whatever somebody's going to give him, he's never getting any closer to his own goal. And he's never actually going to be satisfied in this job, right? As a developer. And that's ultimately we're all looking for, you know, the things that make us happy, which is going to be a little bit different for everybody. Some of them may be working for Google. Some of them may be having time and location freedom. Some of them may be something completely different, right? I want to build my own product or something like that. And so the more that we're just willing to take whatever and anything that's handed to us, the further we actually get away from those goals. So yeah, I'm just trying to read some of these comments too, Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that being said, for anybody who's looking to become a developer, like we mentioned in the beginning, the WebDev Kickstarter is here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super cool. And it's a really great way if you're interested in becoming a developer and you're thinking about maybe joining the incubator, this is a great first step because it's a low barrier of entry. You can do this stuff at your own convenience, your own time. You can learn everything you need to know so that when you join WebDev Incubator, you can hit the ground running, come jump into JavaScript frameworks with us and really start crushing it. We've had people who are already working as web developers within their first year, within really a few months of joining WebDev Incubator. So it's really a great place to be. And if that is you, you could write something down.
Flexibility.
Flexible. Down.
We are good at
down
naming
in the description.
Words.
And we'll reach out to you about an action call. So like Russ was mentioning, we can go over your goals with you, help you figure out what's right for you. If WebDev Incubator is right for you, if WebDev Kickstarter is right for you, or if self-study is right for you.
Yeah, and there's no pressure. I mean, the call is really to help give you some feedback and some guidance and really just get an idea of who you are and help solidify things, right? Because sometimes in our own mind, we have an idea of things, but being able to talk that over with somebody else who's been there and gone through the same experience is actually a really powerful
it helps so much, dude. Yeah, because it's like, I mean, I know when we started too, it's a huge industry. Like, so
totally,
you like it's one thing, knowing what you want to actually focus on is totally different, right? And sometimes it's hard to figure out if you don't have people that know also have been there or been through it.
Yeah. And believe it or not, one of the biggest things that I've seen in the action calls, I take a lot of these action calls throughout the week. And one of the things that I've seen the most that people struggle with is, believe it or not, it has nothing to do with code. It's almost entirely mindset related. And that has to do with like that call that I was just talking about. I mean, 99% of the like struggles that people have is mindset related because we're our worst enemies usually. Like we're the ones who are telling ourselves we can't do it or it's too tough or we don't know which direction to go. And having somebody else to sort of bounce those ideas off of is really powerful. So if that's something that you're looking for, like he said, throw the word flexible in the comments. We'll reach out to you. You can also scheduled. There's a link somewhere in the group. I think it's, if you want a custom game plan, it's like a pinned comment. You can just schedule directly through there. Also, I do want to mention, if you guys have not seen yet, we do have a YouTube channel, which we're starting to build up. So these calls, these like weekly live streams that we do are being posted in there. And there's, we're building a little community in there as well. So if you like digesting information that way, we also have a podcast, so you can listen to these through our podcast as well. But yeah, with that, if you are inside the Web Dev Incubator, we're actually going over our quarterly planning today. So hopefully you guys had a chance to do that. I know last week was busy and not a lot of people had the opportunity. So
a lot going on.
Hopefully you guys had the opportunity this week and we're going over that. Otherwise, we'll see you next Saturday. Hopefully we'll have Randall Lapointe on and we'll see, we'll be flexible. So
yeah,
thank you guys for tuning in. We love you and hope you have a great week and looking forward to seeing you next Saturday. Peace out, guys.
Later, fellas.